This is channel Russian Photo. My name is Mitra. You can find me at eBay, where you can purchase a lot of vintage photo equipment in my store. Today we'll speak about a camera which is very popular among my buyers. It's a Rangefinder film photo camera FED-2. This camera is a good example of development with very small jumps. That's why I call this video a small step from Leica. This camera could become a breakthrough, but it didn't, developing gradually. Nevertheless, it's a very interesting, nice and reliable camera. Let's watch it in details.
I will start the story about FED-2 from Anton Makarenko, an outstanding Soviet teacher and educator who founded the future FED plant. After the First World War and Civil War in Russia, there was a great number of homeless children and juvenile offenders. In 1927, Makarenko founded a children labor commune near Kharkov, which was the capital of Soviet Ukraine in that time. It was his second colony. He was forced to leave his first children commune by the educational authorities of that time, who could not accept his innovative pedagogical ideas and intrigued against him. New colony was founded within the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or NKVD, which protected Makarenko from educational bureaucrats. That labor commune got the name of the Soviet revolutionary and founder of Soviet secret police Felix Edmundovich Dzerzhinsky. First letters of his full name gave the name to the commune, future plant, and photo camera FED. The commune soon became a mighty industrial plant. Firstly, they produced metal and wooden furniture, lubricators, sport clothes, but soon FED labor commune started to produce more complicated devices, electric drills. Then communards decided to produce photo cameras. As there was almost no photo industry in USSR before, any experience of creating photo cameras was almost totally absent. So it was decided to copy a successful foreign model, German Leica II, which was introduced in 1932. It was copied 1-to-1 and got the name FED. It was produced during 21 years, since 1934 till 1955, with an intermission during Second World War. About 700,000 cameras were made. Although technologically FED was modified many times, for a photographer, early and late cameras had very few improvements. First cameras didn't have a cold shoe, but got it very soon. Release button, got a carving for a remote release cable. Before Second World War, FED plant tried to produce new lenses, viewfinders, exposure meters. In 1940, plans about new model appeared, but during Second World War, plant was evacuated to Siberia in Pertsk, where produced equipment for airplanes. After returning to Kharkov, it was very difficult to restore the production of cameras, so the plant just resumed the production of pre-war FED. For the mid-30s, it was a progressive and modern camera, but for the mid-50s, it was rather archaic. So model change was inevitable. In 1950, a prototype of FED-2 appeared. It was an intermediate model with many parts inherited from first FED. And in 1955, FED-2 was introduced. It was a fully original model, developed by FED plant fully independently. FED-2 was produced till 1970. Totally 1,632,000 cameras were made. Comparing with FED, it had many improvements. First FED had separate rangefinder and viewfinder with magnification 0.44 times. It wasn't comfortable to use. In FED-2, viewfinder with magnification 0.75 times and rangefinder were united in one window. Also, FED-2 got a dioptric adjustment for people with vision disorders. Rangefinder base was increased greatly, from 38 mm in first FED to 67 mm in FED-2, and that's where we can say the more the better. First FED had a switch for turning off the shutter while backwinding. In FED-2, shutter remained the same, and about 12,000 of early cameras had a similar switch, but in 1956, FED-2 got a ring coupling for turning off the shutter. First FED had a removable bottom for the film loading, which had one lock. Tripod socket was located near the edge, away from the center of gravity, what made fixation of the camera in the case or on the tripod not very firm. FED-2 got a removable rear part that made film loading very comfortable. Number of locks was doubled and tripod socket was located very near to the center of gravity. Generally speaking, there are 4 iterations of FED-2 known. That division is not universally recognized, so I use it just to distinguish different versions of FED-2. First type was produced in 1955-56. Right rangefinder window was rectangular. Such cameras are rather rare. Then this window became round. That's an early type. Second or medium type got a synchrocontact. It was produced in 1956-58. Firstly, the synchrocontact was located near the mount, but then it was moved above, next to the rangefinder window. Simultaneously with moving the synchrocontact, shutter winding head was changed. In order not to forget loaded film type and its ISO, a reminding disc appeared. Also, since 1956, shutter speed can be changed both with cocked or uncocked shutter. Third or late type, which was made in 1958-1969, got a self-timer. This version is the most frequent. Shutter speed disc got a visible axis, and the shutter speeds were marked in a new way, being in accord with new state standard. Thus, 1:25 became 1:30, for example. Cold shoe was raised a bit. That made setting of flashes or external viewfinders more comfortable. Then, a frame near the left window disappeared, and hinges for the strap were removed. In 1969-1970, the fourth type of FED-2 was produced. It can be marked FED-2L. In fact, it's a FED-2 in the body of late FED-3. It appeared because in 1961, FED plant started to produce new model, FED-3, with extended shutter speeds range. In 1966, it got a new body and cocking with lever instead of winding head. So it was decided to unify FED-2 and FED-3 in one body. As you can see, FED-2L is much more like FED-3 than classical FED-2. The rangefinder base was decreased to 43 mm because of the space necessary for long shutter speeds mechanism in FED-3. That mechanism was absent in FED-2 and that space was empty, but due to unification, the base was small like in FED-3. Later in this video, I'll pay more attention to classical FED-2, I mean first 3 types. FED-2L operating will be described in the video devoted to FED-3. But why FED-2 can be sometimes marked FED-2L? It depended on default lens. In that years, new lenses Industar 61 and Industar 61 LD appeared. L means lanthanum, a material which is used in extra heavy crown glass. It was considered to be so important innovation that the box had inscription Lanthanum Optics. Industar 61 was advertised even at the matchboxes. If a FED-2 of 4th type had a default lens Industar 61 LD, then it was marked as L version in the manual, but nowhere else. If it got a usual Industar 26M, it was named FED-2 in the manual. Later that system remained and new models FED-3 and FED-4 would be named L in their manuals. Nowadays all FED-2 of 4th type are usually named FED-2L. So let's watch FED-2 in detail. We will observe FED-2 of 3rd type. It's a fully metal camera which is easy to hold. It's not very heavy, but its weight differed. The early types were lighter, and the later became a bit heavier due to additional mechanisms. Typical FED-2 weight is about half a kilogram. It's not very big also. FED-2L is a bit bigger. On the front we see a window of Rangefinder and Viewfinder, a right round window of the Rangefinder, flash synchro contact, self-timer lever and its activating button, strap hinges, and lens mount. Lens mount full name is M39-1/28,8, where M39 is the diameter of the mount, 39 mm, 1 is a thread pitch, and 28,8 mm is a flange focal distance. It can be also named Leica screw mount. I pay your attention to it because Soviet Union produced 3 different but incompatible M39 mounts with different flange focal distances. You can watch my video So Different M39 Mounts, a story about Russian M39 for details. On the rear side we see a united window of Rangefinder and Viewfinder. At the bottom we see 2 locks and a 3/8" tripod socket. At the top we see backwind head, dioptric adjustment lever, a cold shoe, shutter speed disc, release button with carving for remote release cable, a ring coupling which turns off shutter when backwinding, disc that will remind you what type of film and its ISO loaded, but you must set it yourself, a shutter winding head, and the frame counter marked for 36 frames. Now let's load the film and take a picture. First of all, let's set the lens. Here I have the most default lens as possible, Industar 26M. Insert it into the mount and screw clockwise till the end. Then we'll load the film. Raise the arcs of the 2 locks at the bottom and rotate the right clockwise and the left counterclockwise. Push down the rear cover and remove it. Pull out the take-up spool. It has a clamp looking like a hook that will hold the film tip. Here I have a standard 35mm film in a standard film cassette. Extract the film a bit if necessary and fix the film tip in a clamp. Then, set the take-up spool back in the camera. Film cassette is put in the left socket. Film must be strained tightly between cassette and take-up spool, so if necessary, take up the slack of the film, raising the backwind head and rotating it clockwise. Then, set the rear cover, rotate the arcs at the locks, and drone them. Then let's transport the spoiled part of the film. Cock the shutter rotating the winding head clockwise and push the release button, then repeat. After it, rotating the frame counter, set 0 opposite to an arrow. Cock the shutter and we are ready to take picture. Let's define the exposure parameters. Unfortunately, FED-2 will not help us at all. You can use simple exposure guides that are often printed on the inner side of the film boxes. Use an external light meter, for example from a Leningrad family, or use your previous experience. For example, we decided to use 1/100th shutter speed. To set it, raise the shutter speed disc and rotate it till the desired number will coincide with black dot. Then free the disc. If you made everything properly, the disc will be fixed in the chosen meaning. Then rotate the aperture ring of the lens until the chosen f meaning will be opposite to a triangle. For example, we'll set 4. Then let's make the viewfinding comfortable for our eyes. Watching in the viewfinder, rotate the dioptric adjustment lever until the image will be sharp enough. If we know the exact distance, we can set it directly, rotating the focus ring and setting the number opposite to a red triangle. But most likely we don't know for sure. So let's use the built-in rangefinder. How it works. Rotating the focus ring, a metal circle in the lens moves in or out, pushing the spring-loaded lever inside the mount. Let's remember it. Light reflected by the object is divided into two streams that enter the camera through left and right rangefinder windows. Behind the left window, there are two lenses and a semi-transparent mirror. After the right window, there is a rotating mirror that is firmly connected with a spring-loaded lever inside the mount. If the camera is not focused, the right stream goes through the right window, is reflected by the rotating mirror, then reflected by semi-transparent mirror, and reaches lower lens in another place than the left stream. In the viewfinder, you will see the central part of the object displaced. When we rotate the focusing ring of the lens, it pushes the spring-loaded lever inside the mount that rotates the right mirror. Mirror now reflects the right stream to the point at semi-transparent mirror, where the left stream goes. So, since that point, ways of both streams coincide. Camera is now focused. In the viewfinder, we see central part of the object at the right place. Now we can push the release button and cock the shutter for the next photo. Note that the frame counter moved 1 point further and now shows the second frame is active. When we have all frames used, we need to backwind the film. To turn off the shutter, push the ring coupling around the release button and rotate it to the left. It will stay round, so shutter is now deactivated. According to the manual, close the lens with cap. Raise the backwind head and rotate it clockwise until you hear the sound of the film that left the take-up spool. Backwinding will become easier at that moment. Then, pull down the backwind head, open the locks at the bottom and remove the rear cover. Extract the film cassette, which now can be developed. Set the rear cover back to the camera, that's all. If your FED-2 has a flash synchro contact, plug the flash cable into it. The only shutter speed that can be used with flash is 1/30th. If your FED-2 has a self-timer, it's very easy to use. Cock the shutter, set the exposure parameters, point the camera at the desired object and focus. Rotate the self-timer lever counterclockwise and when you are ready, push the self-timer release button. Shutter will fire in 10-15 seconds. If you have early FED-2 without self-timer, you can use any external self-timer, for example a pneumatic one. Let's speak first of all about possible inscriptions. Early cameras had FED logo and an inscription in Russian, plant named after FED Dzerzhinsky. Late cameras have only FED logo. An inscription made in USSR is also possible. FED-2L has a FED logo at the rear side. As for the name of the camera, there are two possible versions. Almost all cameras have upper variant and late FED-2, and all FED-2L have lower type with name FED, both in Russian and Latin fonts. A few words about numeration. Since 1955 till 1961, there was continuous numbering. The first FED-2 had number 1, the second number 2, and so on. Numbers were not reset in the new year. Such numbers have a sign of number N before the numerals. I have seen the numbers starting with letter A, and not only made by FED, but for example by Arsenal. I do not know exactly what does it mean, but suppose that such cameras were produced in excess of the plan, or replaced defective refused cameras. Since 1961, sign of number disappeared and the system became ciphered and can't say us anything anymore. Numbers contain information like a barcode, what shift and what workshop of a plant produced that camera, its modification and etc. To decode it, we need to have FED archives. Totally untypical for Soviet photo industry, FED-2 could have different body colors. The majority of cameras were gray, but second type of FED-2 could be also brown, green, or blue. Third type of FED-2 could be blue, except standard gray. FED-2 had commemorative versions. In 1957, some cameras were devoted to 6th World Festival of Youth and Students and got inscription Festival on the top, which could be black or red. Also, this inscription can be on the rear side. Such cameras are rather rare. Next commemorative version is much rarer, almost unique. It got a special name Aurora II, special numeration, and was devoted to the 50th anniversary of Great October Revolution. Also, FED-2 was produced in China. In USSR, cameras were so scarce that photoplants made simplified versions of popular models to satiate the market. In 1959-1961, FED-plant produced Zarya, a simplified version of FED-2 without rangefinder. Viewfinder is used to estimate the frame borders only, so it's a typical scale focus camera. Focusing is performed with scale symbols or distance scale at the lens. Totally more than 140,000 cameras were made. There was Zarya 3 with built-in exposure meter, but it remained experimental. Less than 100 cameras were produced. Let's speak about lenses. Early FED-2 inherited the collapsible lens FED from the first FED. It was the copy of German Leica II and was produced since 1934. In 1957, a fast lens Industar 26M appeared. It could have various body types. Early lenses had a pin to simplify the screwing of the lens in the mount, then lost it, and finally got a grooved ring. In 1963, Industar 61 with lanthanum optics was introduced, and later its version Industar 61 LD. In fact, you can set any lens with Leica screw mount to FED-2, but there is a nuance that is applicable to almost all rangefinders with changeable optics. There is a built-in viewfinder that is used for estimating the borders of future photo that has angle of view about 45 degrees. Let's set any normal lens, in other words, any lens with focal distance about 50 mm, for example a default Industar 26M. This lens has the same angle of view as the camera viewfinder, so they coincide, but not starting from the camera, but a bit further. That's why the minimal distance of focusing for Industar 26M is about 1 meter. That's actual for all normal lenses despite of their speed, so what you see in the viewfinder is what you get at the photo. Situation changes if we take lens with another focal distance, for example wide-angle Jupiter 12. If we set it to the camera, we discover that the lens angle of view is almost 1.5 more than the viewfinder one, 63 degrees against 45. Thus, the photo will be wider than the picture in the viewfinder. For example, we want to take a picture of these beautiful women. Red frame is what we see in the viewfinder, and yellow frame shows us the actual photo, so we can make a rude mistake. To avoid it, USSR photo industry produced a very small external viewfinders with different angle of view. It is inserted into the cold shoe and gives you the actual picture. Or you can use a retrofuturistic looking universal turret viewfinder, which has 5 various lenses rotating in block. Note that in this case, external viewfinder is used for aiming, but focusing is performed with default viewfinder, like in FED-1. The same is relevant if we set telelens Jupiter 11 to our FED-2. Lens angle of view is almost 2.5 times smaller than the viewfinder one. If we use default viewfinder of the camera, we will spoil the photo. Red rectangle is what we see in it, and yellow is what we get at the film. As for cases, first FED-2 had collapsible lenses, so the cases have very small front compartment and the case itself is rather flat. Late cases have big front compartment and can contain any normal lens. All the cases are leather with strap. First cases had 2 rivets. Later cases, due to economy, got only 1. FED-2 were supplied in hard cardboard boxes with various pictures, which contained camera with lens and case and a manual. First manuals were similar to FED-1 instruction book, very classic and serious. In the early 60s, manuals followed the fashion and became a bit funny, and at late 60s they were formal and dull. So, if I persuaded you and you want to take a photo with FED-2, where to get it? If you are not in the country of former USSR, where these cameras are widespread, I advise you to go to eBay. This is my ad. As you see, early FED-2 of the second type cost about $30 including shipping. How to choose a good camera? In fact, FED-2 is reliable, but it has two weak points, and both are connected with shutter. First of all, curtains. Because of time, curtains often get abrasion area, which is penetrated with light. That light leakage is intolerant, because it will spoil your photo. There are several ways to fix it. For example, one of the simplest is insulating tape. It will close the small abrasion, and camera can be used without any issues. The second problem is the curtains that get stuck and move very slowly and lazy. Of course, it's a serious problem, but in real life, shutter will not break at once. First of all, long shutter speeds will be out of action, bulb mode, then 1/25, and so on. 1/500 will break the last. So, if you don't need bulb mode and you are ready to resign yourself with unstable work of 1/25 shutter speed, you can purchase the camera with that defect. Otherwise, FED-2 almost doesn't have possible problems. FED-2 couldn't repeat the success of its ancestor, first FED. Thanks to the 1.5 million cameras produced, FED-2 was widespread, but it wasn't popular or desired. It was difficult for me to find original Soviet advertising ads of FED-2. Also, it is absent in films, unlike first FED. Main reason is that FED-2 appeared too late. In fact, it was Leica II brought to perfection, a camera from 1930s with all the drawbacks cured. But photo industry was developing at a furious pace in that period, so it wasn't enough just to be a perfect Leica II. Let's watch the timeline for illustration. Above you can see what we have already learned. First FED, then FED-2 since 1955. After the Second World War, FED plant got a powerful rival, new plant KMZ in Krasnogorsk. That new plant was very ambitious. Firstly, in 1948, it got documentation from Kharkov for first FED and started to produce it under the name Zorki. I must underline that the base for both plants was the same, German Leica II, and both plants started from its copy. But KMZ engineers started to upgrade it rapidly. In 1955, Zorki C with synchro contact appeared. In 1954, Zorki II with self-timer. In 1956, Zorki 2C with both synchro contact and self-timer. Note that FED-2 will get both these options 2 years later. Then KMZ engineers decided that there is no way to improve Leica II and gave it up as a base. They took another Leica camera, the third model. It wasn't plain copying, Leica III was improved greatly. New camera got the name Zorki III and was available since 1951. Note that FED plant was still producing first FED in that time. Zorki III wasn't very reliable and was complemented with modification Zorki 3M since 1954. Since 1955, Zorki 3C with self-timer appeared, and finally in 1956, Zorki 4 was introduced. It's probably the best USSR rangefinder camera, and it was produced almost simultaneously with FED-2, but of course, Zorki 4 was a camera of higher class. In addition to Zorki 4, simple Zorki 5 and Zorki 6 were produced. They were unified with contemporary SLR and were similar to FED-2. In 1964, KMZ made an automatic Zorki 10. You need it just to focus. That was a real breakthrough. What about FED? It pursued it and produced FED-3, with a bit extended shutter speed range, and FED-4 with built-in light meter. Automatic cameras were produced also, but their number was rather small. In my personal opinion, FED plant lost the pace and had to catch up. Being almost a monopolist until the late 40s, it chose a strategy of small steps, small upgrades, and thus performed evolution development. Result is obvious. By the late 60s, FED plant became just a rangefinder plant. On the contrary, KMZ gave up rangefinder production as too simple and focused at SLR. Here are the pictures taken with FED-2. With all its peculiarities, it is an honest and old-school camera. It recorded the life of enormous country, USSR, its holidays and working days. FED-2 was a product of its time, durable, simple, a bit old-fashioned. It became a trusted friend to thousands of amateur photographers. Thank you for watching this story about evolution camera, FED-2.